But don't talk to me. Talk to your mama. Same reason why your mama wanted more money and she told she wanted child support. And she think I'm gonna continue to do for y'all. Nah, that shit dead. Talk to your mama. Don't call me for nothing. Y'all don't even have to call me no more. Talk to your mama, not me. Deal with your mama. I call your mama and talk to your mama about it. Ask her why she did what she did. And that'll explain why I did what I did. Now, I will not be coming to get y'all no more. Yes, I am home. I'm not coming to get y'all no more. Talk to your mama. She does not care about how y'all feel. So she don't care about the kid that's hungry. So that shit. I'm not coming no more.
That video went viral on social media a few weeks ago. Showed up on my Twitter feed. I feel bad for that family. I feel bad for those kids. I understand the father's anger. I try not to judge anybody, pass judgment on anyone. But it brings back painful memories of our situation, our family. And it gives me motivation to finally finish this film project and tell our story, because I believe our story can help that young father in the situation that he's in. This is my family court case. It's been a long time since I opened these things up and went through them. Brings back a lot of memories. Cooter, Smoller and Friedman, one of the top family law firms in Washington, D.C. and K Street. You see a lot of discovery, a lot of case exhibits, transcripts, all of this stuff brings back memories. Well, it's time for me to open it back up, open the files, open the books, and share this experience, and hopefully be able to help families that are contemplating divorce or child custody cases and child support cases. I've been through it all. Appellate court, federal court, state child support court, every court, you name it, I've been through it. So, stay tuned.
The Obama inauguration was a pivotal moment for my generation. In many ways, it's a chapter in history similar to that of the MLK speech or JFK's mission to the moon. For me, I believe everyone will come to know where they were January 20th, 2009.
I stand here today humbled by the task before us.
I was on the U.S. Capitol Mall with over 1 million other people watching history unfold. And like many of the others that weathered the cold air, we all knew we were witnessing a great story of change unfold right before our very own eyes. People from all walks of life, backgrounds, classes, races, and religions, with stories of their own to be told, to be heard, to be listened to. My name is Kwame Gyamfi, and this is our story about our family's journey to the steps of the United States Supreme Court.
This whole Obama inauguration and administration represents not only a change for our country, but a change in the direction of us as a family.
This film project is over 10 years old and literally sat in my closet all this time. As I reflect back on the experience, there's this saying that time heals all wounds. I will say it heals some, but not all.
To tell our story, we have to start in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Jacksonville is a small town in the South where everybody knows everybody. It's not uncommon for couples to grow old and die together. My parents have been married for close to 60 years now, and I'm their youngest child of 7 children. Jacksonville has a way of drawing me back because it will always be home. My wife and I married in October of 2002. Isaiah, my firstborn son from a prior relationship, served as our ring bearer.
My wife is everything Solomon talked about when he said, "Who can find a capable wife?" She's worth more than all the rubies and diamonds in the world.
I can only pray that my wife and I have a marriage similar to that of my father and mother. My father retired from the military in the mid-60s, and like any other World War II and Korean War veteran, he never talks about his service in the Corps.
Better not be nothing about the military.
My son's mother and I got along very well in the beginning.
You know, she's a good sister, you know. When we started, man, in the financial situation, I was broke as a joke. You know, I went to Ghana, did my tour in West Africa, lived there for about a year, came back, and she had also went to Ghana, but we didn't meet in Ghana, but we had a mutual friend over there, and she sent me her name and number. I got back in the States, you know, I hooked up.
Wow.
So
I remember that project. Right after graduate school, I went back to Ghana. There was 2 projects floating around at the United Nations when I worked there. One was called the Slave Route Project, and then the other one was called the Silk Road Project. The Silk Road Project, the Chinese team took that to a whole nother level in terms of what they were doing. Today they would call it the Belt and Road Initiative, but both projects were intended to bring socio-economic development in their respective countries, whereas in Ghana took the Slave Route Project, and the whole idea behind the Slave Route Project was to develop a global tourism project targeting various countries around the world with a large African ancestry population. Ghana was going to become the go-to country for Pan-Africanism. And I remember being at the World Bank, and one of the things I was telling the committee, which I was a part of that committee, by the way, was that we need to rebrand the name because people of African ancestry is not going to want to identify with the project called the Slave Route Project. They all just kind of looked at me, but they knew it was true. It was difficult raising money for that project. And when I came back to the US and tried to find private financing, it was tough. It was tough. And then, you know, I had Isaiah, and you can't buy diapers on dreams. So I had to go get a real job, which is what I did. But the videotape kind of brought back memories for me.
So, you know, professional sister, master's degree, and educator. So we hooked up, man. We had a real good conversation, and we dated for about what, 7, 8 months or something like that, and just decided that it wasn't gonna work out. So, you know, we parted. It was mutual. We went our own way, but come to find out, she was pregnant. I'll never forget the first time my son's mother came up to me and told me she was pregnant. Without even flinching, I told her, "That's fine. We'll get through this." When the baby came, the nurse told me to go and hold the baby. And you know, a newborn, most men, when you experience and see a child being born, it's a very serious experience. So they asked me to hold the baby, and the first thing Isaiah did is he grabbed my hand, and
So that was truly love at first sight then, huh?
yeah, it was truly love at first sight. What her and I decided to do, we decided to do a 50-50 arrangement. And what that meant is that I was gonna have Isaiah on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. And then I would alternate the next week from a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I'd drop him off on that Saturday. So then that way in the week, we both would get 7 days, 7 full days. So, you know, man, like I said, when I came back from Africa, I ain't had nothing, man. I was starting off really from the ground floor, trying to push this tourism plan, and it just wasn't working out. So I got back into IT. You know, that's what I got my degree in. That's what I started off when I went to NC State. Got back into IT, got in on the ground floor of what they call an ERP situation, man, and anybody lucky enough to learn PeopleSoft or SAP or anything, Oracle, or though, if you pick up those kind of skills, man, you can pretty much go wherever you want to go, and the money is good. So I took a gamble, man. I went in as a contractor, started working at NASA, and teaching at a university. So I'm working like 2 and 3 jobs. You remember I was living down in Duke's basement.
This is your first time visiting Daddy's dungeon, and you gonna help Daddy clean it up? There go part of your pension. There go part of your trust fund. Oh, Daddy gotta figure a way to make this stuff work, boy. Yeah, but you well worth it. Okay.
We were both poor, man, but Juliet had been with me all along. And because at the time she was a graduate student over getting her pharmacy degree. When those jobs came through, man, that gave us an opportunity to really make some changes. Able to buy a house.
We got the extended family room.
Extended family room, big, nice.
We got a cul-de-sac. This is location.
Yeah, we have a cul-de-sac.
We're gonna be putting the Bose home theater system.
Up there.
Is the kitchen.
Kitchen.
We got the wooden floor.
Polished and nice.
With the
Big
bay window. Let me get a bigger picture up.
I never said I was not in support of Isaiah having some sort of support. I never said that. What I saw, I did not support. Well, okay, I'll tell you this. Anything that's going to make Isaiah or get Isaiah to do whatever it is we're trying to get him to do, I'm down for. But what I saw, I ain't down for that. And if that's the kind of therapy sessions we talking about, then I'm just saying, and that's not healthy for him.
And I hear you, but I disagree with that part. I think God gave you, before there was therapists, before there was PhDs, God gave you a natural motherly instincts to protect, raise, and develop this child.
You know, as I look back on that, I believe I did overreact. You know, it just brought back memories of my own school situation and special education classes. And when I would take Isaiah to therapy, I always felt like someone was saying that something was wrong with him. And that used to bother me. I used to think that it would impact his self-esteem. So I was very protective because of my own personal issues. You know, going back to my hometown of Jacksonville, I was in special education classes, and You know, you'd be in the regular class and then you'd have to get up and then you go over to the trailer classes, and didn't belong there, but that's just how it was back then. And taking Isaiah to therapy brought back those type of memories. So I would always give his mother a hard time about those therapy classes.
Took him to school. Teacher said that she did have difficulty understanding him. How long was he in your class?
For 3 years.
Have you ever had any major concerns or difficulty with his behavior or his academic progression or anything?
I have never had major concerns about his behavior. At one point, probably the latter part of his first year, I discussed some concerns about Isaiah's spoken language.
And we said, okay, well, we put him there, and we had him in therapy, language therapy, for like about a year. But of course, man, after a year, I figure, the teacher, let's check with the teacher, see how she feel about it. If the teacher is cool with him, whereas we don't have to take him out of school anymore, then let's fully integrate him, because by this time he's 4 years old, and we've been taking him out of school, taking him to the hospital. So after a year of that, man, we had a teacher conference, and we met with the teacher, man, and the teacher said that, she thought he'd come a long way. He's doing very well, and she thought that he could fully be integrated in school, and we didn't really need to continue with the therapy. We had him tested at GW by a licensed audiologist. Man, after that testing, I'm sitting there chilling. That lady comes out, man, and she tells us, she said, ain't nothing wrong with this boy. She said, he don't have no auditory processing disorder. She said, everything checks out normal. As a matter of fact, he's advanced in a lot of other areas.
Jaden was born in 2004. He's the first child of my marriage to Juliet. It appeared Juliet and I were settling into our home in Maryland and actually living the American dream. However, the relationship between my older son and his mother continued to deteriorate. We couldn't agree on anything. We would clash over the medical needs of Isaiah and finances. I didn't like the direction that this relationship was going in, and I had some concerns.
Our relationship, man, was in a spiral. It was falling apart and getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually, man, we got into an argument, and she talking about court and litigation, and I was like, look, you gotta do what you gotta do.
I always knew that the court system was something that was very serious. I never had any dealings with the court. I was unfamiliar with the term process server, didn't know what that was. And as I reflect back on it, I was very naive about the whole judicial process.
And 2 months later, man, the process server came over, rang the doorbell, and I opened the door, man, some strange dude smiling, big old smile on his face. He served me with some papers. Man, my wife saw those papers, man, and I think, mentally she kind of just went off in her head somewhere so that she didn't have to deal. We're focused on our family. I'm focused on Isaiah, I'm focused on her, we focused on the new baby. So this issue of being served with court papers is kind of a distant scenario for her. But I knew it was something I had to deal with. Before we went to court, I consulted 3 attorneys. And each attorney, they all, man, they said, you look like a nice guy. And as long as you're taking care of your son, you can see your son, you don't have no financial burden on you or anything like that. They said, you got a good situation. And you can come to court and it'll be in a worse situation walking away, and you don't want to take that risk.
There's this term called a New York minute, and a New York minute oftentimes references a judge, a family court judge, that can turn your whole life around the stroke of a pen in ways that you could never imagine. And if you're not mentally prepared, it can have dire consequences on your psyche. And I've heard of all kind of strange happenings in the court system, but me personally, I never dealt with anything like that. And I would honestly say I was not prepared mentally for the New York Minute.
Carmen Ross, a Lawrence attorney and peace advocate, is found violently beaten and stabbed 13 times in her home. It took almost a year until police arrested her ex-husband, Thomas Murray, a K-State professor. At the time of the murder, the two were divorcing and battling for custody of their young child.
And he's not a person used to losing. And I think he just lost it.
The trial in 2005 was incredibly high profile, the focus of a 48 Hours TV special, and Murray's conviction.
Professor Murray was going through a contentious custody case. His wife was leaving him, suing him for alimony and child support. He was unable to handle it, couldn't handle it, and ended up killing his wife.
Yeah, my day in court came in February 2004. I was represented by an attorney, and my son's mother was represented by an attorney.
Here today on a child support matter, of the party's soon-to-be 6-year-old son. I just entered my appearance today in this case, and I will be filing an answer to the counterclaim today.
Okay. Are you proceeding on at least temporary support today?
Yes.
You can get the support for the minor child?
Definitely, Your Honor.
The child has been residing with you, I assume, for the last 6 years?
Man, me and my lawyer, we both did this. Whoa, ma'am, Your Honor. We said this situation is not the way it seems.
This is totally joint custodial situation at this stage, Your Honor, totally.
I need to get a calendar because I need a calendar and a ruler.
She pulled out this piece of paper. She says Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. What days do you have it? I got them on such and such and such and such a day. What days do you have them? I have them on such and such and such and such a day. So then she does her little scale. Then, okay, you got them these days, these days, these days. I went from being a parent that thought that he had 50-50, a parent that's involved, a parent that's making decisions and sharing decisions, to a non-custodial parent.
Child support. This is the New York Minute that the lawyers were talking about. With the stroke of a pen, your finances, your arrangements with your own children, it changes in an instant. For me, the main thing that stuck out in my mind was this term called non-custodial. I turned to my lawyer. What is a non-custodial parent? What is that? Next question I asked him was, what's the next steps? Like, what kind of courtroom is this? And then he explained that this is a child support courtroom. It's different from a family court experience. And from there, I knew I needed to do more research into the court system.
Child support courts are very limited in what they can legally hear and apply when issuing orders. Their jurisdiction is limited to determining the amount of monetary support, making a decision as to who is the non-custodial and the custodial parent based on a standard state guideline, assigning terms of payment, and in some cases, enforcing payment.
The judge rendered a judgment of $2,000 a month.
You play pro basketball?
Look, man, I heard that in the courtroom, man, and you could hear a pin drop. Everybody was in that courtroom, quiet. And the interesting thing is that the clerks and the judge, none of them could look me in my eye because they knew she played that game. Because look, here's the thing. The magistrate had let my lawyer know that she was bound by the guidelines. Most people.
I learned later on what non-custodial parent actually means. I still, to this day, don't think it applies because it has to deal with the calculated formula in terms of physically who has the child the most. I ended up paying a financial cost monthly child support, $2,000 a month, mainly because my work as a chief information officer at Southeastern University, that salary, and I just recently signed a subcontract with Lockheed Martin at NASA, and the gross income of both revenue streams was attached to or put into the child support calculator. Took me a while to figure all of that stuff out. You would think that the lawyer would have helped you adjust the finances in such a way that it would not have been so much, because the business is separate from the actual individual income. And we didn't take any of that into account. That's why the amount was so high.
Most people have in their mind the fact that you go into a courtroom, that one person presents their complaint, and then you have an opportunity to deal with those complaints. Not in a support hearing.
But you have no rights in that.
No. So what that means is, like, you walk in the courtroom, and I can imagine men now, just like me. You walk in there, man, well, Your Honor, that ain't true, this, that, and the other. I got this, I got that. You pulling out receipts. Man, the judge can't weigh that. So, like, this judge talking to me like I'm some, like I'm Willie Horton, she's within her legal right to tell me, sir, we don't hear custody-related issues. Sir, all I need to know is assess your income so that I can assess child support. Sir, that's straight. Doesn't matter that you have a relationship and you got this and you got that. When I walked out of there, man, I was devastated.
That first round in court, that was a tough round. But I think everyone should have somebody in their life that can guide them, that can tell them the truth without sparing their feelings. And fortunately for me, I had someone like that. We called him Big Papa. And Big Papa, he'd always say to me, and he sounds like this, "Boy, don't you go into that courtroom. You work out a deal with that woman." Oh man, did I take his advice? No, of course not. That's what young people do. But everything Big Papa told me turns out to be the truth. And I paid a huge price financially and emotionally because Big Papa was right.
There was a period where, my head, man, was just ringing with voices. I felt truly traumatized because my son and my relationship with him was under attack. I'm hearing Tony say, "Son, you might have to let that boy go." I'm hearing voices like, "You going up against the mother, you can't win." All of that stuff ringing in your head. I'm paying child support. I have a wife who's who's given birth. And then I have my son that I have to deal with. So, and the voices are telling me, you got to let this boy go because she's not going to give your family a break. This woman is going to dismantle your household. I mean, man, there were times when I'm with Isaiah And we doing our little things, man. And I'm about to tear up.
That's right.
My name is Isaiah, and your name is
Daddy.
I couldn't let him see me cry, though. Because a boy who has a strong father in his life, he never forgets the first time he sees his daddy cry. This child can't see his daddy cry. Not right now. He's not ready for that. He wouldn't understand that. I'm sitting there trying.
The first court case experience, the child support court, got my attention. I started paying attention to the news media and particularly domestic violence cases. You know, I wondered, could this be me one day? You know, I heard about these things, but I never put two and two together to think that one day I can be in a criminal proceeding because of a lapse in judgment or do something out of frustration. Watching the news, there was one case that caught my attention. That was the Denton case. I went to his memorial, literally. I mean, the young man ended up being killed by police, waving a hatchet, trying to get into the daycare center because his wife told the daycare center not to allow him to pick up the children. So he came back with that hatchet. And it was tragic consequences. 2 small children was involved in that situation. Thankfully, the children were safe, but police officers took his life.
Shaken by violence.
How many shots did you hear? Do you remember?
4, 5, something like that at the same time. Prince George's County Police shot and killed an armed man outside a home-based daycare in the middle of the afternoon. He'd come here around 3 p.m. to pick up his 2 sons, but the provider turned him away because their mother said not to let him take the kids. He left, then returned, armed with an axe.
The kids were in the home, and it's possible that they heard the shots or maybe even seen something.
The couple's sons are 1 and 2.5. Police aren't saying why the mom didn't want their dad to pick them up, but they do say there were prior domestic issues.
We're going to look into if there were any child custody issues.
The next phase of litigation was the family court itself. It took me a little while to understand the difference between child support court and family court. Those are 2 entirely different courts in terms of jurisdiction. And the more and more I got involved in doing the research, I started to understand a little more about the language, some of the terms. I knew what a process server was. I knew the term jurisdiction, and the next phase of the court was family court. And so we proceeded. It was a difficult time. I was a CIO at a university. I was also a software engineer at NASA. I had a newborn child, a wife, and then I had Isaiah, 50% of the time. I knew I needed help, so I made the decision to hire a real law firm, and they don't come cheap. I needed help, and I needed people to step in and actually package the case, present the case. And the retainer fee up front was $15,000 just to get started. But the best investment that I made was the purchase of a book called Domestic Relations Manual. I didn't have time to read it, but I really wanted to learn more about the whole process and procedure and not go in so blindly. So I relied heavily on the law firm, and I remember this one incident where the partners were, I won't say they were arguing, but it was an intense conversation, and they were talking about strategy. And I remember bits and pieces. They were talking about the family court structure, that there's no existing order on the child. And, I didn't catch all the pieces. It wasn't until later that I would understand what they were talking about. If you ask me whether or not it's worth the investment in a family law firm, I say absolutely. Because you can never underestimate the power of a family law judge. They can turn your life around and upside down in a New York minute. But what I did learn from the law firm is that there's even something more important than the judge itself, and that's the court record. And that's really where the difference between an average law firm versus an extraordinary law firm comes into play. They understand how important that record is.
One of the most important documents in any kind of court case, specifically family court, is the exhibits list. And K Street lawyers, they know how to help you put your documents and everything in order. Anything and everything is literally in here. Medical records, school records, financial statements, tax information, videotape depositions, everything is in here. Your lawyer helps you put all of these things in place. And you never really think about how home videos becomes part of some sort of court exhibit, All you're doing is just enjoying life and enjoying your family, but lo and behold, you have to put on the record your whole life in order to prove that there is a bond in a relationship. I know with mothers, it's an assumption or presumption that there is that maternal bond to a child, but for fathers, it's a little different. You actually have to put on the court record that you indeed have a bond in a relationship with the child in family court, not child support court. It doesn't matter in child support court, but in family court, when you begin to discuss issues of custody, that's when all of this stuff becomes relevant. It took quite a few drafts to complete the exhibits list. In addition to the video exhibits, we had to include the financial exhibits as well. This included insurance, child care from our joint banking account, as well as Isaiah's college pre-plan account. I felt good going into family court. I felt prepared.
Family court allows a broad spectrum of issues to be heard, such as child support, as well as what's in the best interest of the child. Visitation, child play, rights to go to a doctor, and who makes the decisions and final decisions regarding custodial rights.
And Mr. Gomfi has filed an answer and counterclaim for custody.
With Your Honor's permission, we'd like to show the DVD. The first chapter in the DVD, Your Honor, if you follow along on the record, this particular one is called Activities with the Father, ages 0 through 3. This is First Father's Day, Georgetown, D.C., Spring 1998.
So how does it feel, your first Father's Day?
This is my first Father's Day, my son Isaiah, and it's a very joyous moment for me in my life. We're in Georgetown right now, and Isaiah is about 3 months and a week or so old.
The next one is first piano lesson with Daddy, spring 1998.
There we go. That's right.
The next one, Your Honor, is first night at Daddy's basement apartment, spring 1998.
Take out that one pill, and when you take that one pill and place it in your mouth,
The next one, Isaiah and I fishing in Annapolis, Maryland. That's activities with father, age 4 through 6.
The judge was annoyed with all of these videos.
The next one is labeled.
She made a comment. She said, do I have to sit here and watch all these video slides of Mr. Gyamfi and his son Isaiah? And I remember my lawyers said, well, my client wants to make sure that it's on the record and that the court understands he has a relationship with his child. And the judge said, well, I get it. You know, Mr. Gyamfi loves his son. Let's move on. We were already close to finishing anyway, so we continued with the video slideshow.
After almost 2 years of waiting for a final decision from the family court case, the court took a neutral position and neither altered the custody arrangements or amount of child support. Therefore, everything remained as is.
That's not an exaggeration. It took the judge 2 years to render a decision, and actually the judge had to be forced to issue that order because within those 2 years I've been reading that domestic relations manual and uncovered this legal instrument called a writ. So I filed a writ of mandamus with the higher court. I filed pro se, and the judge was forced to issue an order, and didn't change anything in the order. Everything stayed the same. But within those 2 years, there was no need for the specialized law firm. I actually downgraded to a solo practitioner, so I still had an attorney. But that's not an exaggeration. The judge took 2 years to issue an order. Man, I was so upset.
No, I never would have thought being in a family court, having to be forced to pay child support, or even fighting for custody for your children, is a very strange concept for me, given my background and how I was raised. I love my children. My children loves me. And how it ended up like this, I don't know. The lawyers, the expert witnesses, the money that's involved, I'm not even sure if it's all worth it. You know, a lot of people told me, just walk away. You know, your child will see you as an adult when he gets older. But these are the tender years. These are the years where you mold a child. I couldn't imagine just walking away. I can't even imagine, you know, even telling somebody to walk away from their children. You know, my father, he fought in World War II, and he fought the Korean War. And if my father can fight 2 wars and fight Jim Crow, what in the world do I look like walking away? You know, it's definitely a different time, because if you would have told me when I'm taking care of my babies like I know how to take care of my babies, that I can be dragged into court and the threat of having those babies taken away from me and being made to pay child support, which is something I already do in the first place, it's enough to make anybody bitter. And sometimes, you know, when I hear people talk about the child support system, I'm like, they really don't understand why we are so angry about it. Because in the end, it's all about the children. And it's truly what's in their best interest. When the dust settles, they truly have the last word.
Although I was frustrated with the final order from the family court judge, I decided that it was still worth fighting in the appellate court. So I started studying appellate law and the appeals process, and of course using my domestic relations manual. But I knew I needed a break, a much needed break. I was still working as a CIO at the university, and I was still working as a software engineer at NASA. But a bright spot for me and my wife was the work that we did in Ghana. So we would fly to Ghana and spend time with her family, and we would do our international development projects, educational development projects.
One of the things that kept me preoccupied was my passion for international development work that we do in Ghana. My wife is from Ghana, and she shares my passion for the work we do at Teshie State Preparatory School. As a family, we adopted this school and committed ourselves to providing support for the upkeep and infrastructure of the school.
Teshie State Preparatory School is the school that hosts children from ages of nursery up until about 11, 12 years old, equivalent to our elementary school back in the United States. One of the things that my wife and I as a family are working on is to provide some adequate infrastructure for the educational facilities here at Teshie. One of the first projects is a project to actually bring electricity into the classrooms. Currently, there is no electricity in the classrooms, and it becomes very difficult for the students to read and study and do their type of homework and materials. Also, it becomes a problem for faculty to teach under these conditions.
If you are genuine and sincere about your development efforts, then you have to prioritize and take full responsibility for those efforts. You said you like to make sure that there's some development that has taken place before you leave. Then you should be responsible to ensure that all of that goes through.
You know, my wife had warned me that my personality was changing. She said I was becoming more cranky and short-tempered. She's probably right. So it wasn't a big surprise when I lost both my NASA job and my position as CIO within a short period of time, I guess I finally reached my breaking point. But, you know, I needed that downtime. Sometimes the elements of faith and steps in times where you don't even know it. And that was probably one of those times. But I still continue to work on the appeals case with my attorney during that downtime. And I spent more time with the kids.
Bobby, you online?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm being right. Right. Well, this is according to this, it gives us a little more time, but we really don't have any.
By the time I started the appeals process, I was over $120,000 in payments and legal fees.
When do they need to have this thing done? Is it as soon as for SAP to come back live?
And I felt the stress of work. My jobs at NASA and the universities were both terminated within a 6-week period.
So I think we need to develop an exit strategy.
Okay.
That means that you have to leave here again, think about what I'm saying, come back to me, and what we'll have to agree on is a time and a date.
I have thought about that. And I can tell you what I think is a real good exit strategy, because I've thought about this. First thing comes to my mind is really family. And one of the things I wanted to do was to just for a moment get off of this roller coaster, okay? And I thought about being a stay-at-home dad for a little while.
800 miles away, we're both linked to the Spokane killer.
Now that I was home full time, it gave me some much needed downtime. I think one of the advantages was spending more time with my kids.
Come on, don't you go out there.
Take home my toy. I want to put one there.
I actually enjoyed going to the parks, going to piano lessons, and preparing meals. Okay, we gotta read 2 stories tonight. Isaiah, you need to read the whole story and then answer the questions. Hold on, boo. Hold on. The other advantage is that it gave me the time I needed to prepare for the Court of Appeals.
So one thing I want to do is I do want to close the deal on this whole issue of modification of child support. Then I got to file a motion to have the judge hear evidence suggesting.
I had a lot of hope with the new family law attorney I hired. The first thing I needed her to do was to file a motion for modification of child support. With the loss of those 2 jobs, I had a lot of pressure. Pressure to fulfill my obligations to the school in Ghana and continue to work on my international development projects. But that was not the only pressing matter. We welcomed another child named Caleb, and I found out we had another one on the way. And there was no way I could continue to be a house dad. So around this time, I was able to work a new job at the Department of Defense, analyzing their financial systems. Fortunately, I was able to still work on my appellate case with my attorney, but that motion for the modification of child support was denied, but not for the reasons you might be thinking. I spent a lot of time studying the appeals court process, case law, that manual I keep talking about. That manual became my Bible in the family court proceedings. I also had to study the appellate court. I had to start studying constitutional law. I knew that the appellate court was composed of 3 judges. That was my constitutional right. That was the process of the appeals court. And I started reading so much about family law, I began to understand why the lawyers in the law firm was in such an intense conversation about strategy when they made the comment that there's no existing order on the child. Then I understood. Would have saved me a lot of money and a lot of headache. I'll get back to that strategy later on.
The issue before the Court of Appeals was that the family court erred in failing to protect Isaiah's best interests by ignoring established family law that puts a child's best interest within the confines and protection of a family unit. The brief was later amended to include a petition for the adoption of Isaiah.
Did you hear that? The brief was amended to include a petition for the adoption of Isaiah signed by my wife. That was the legal argument the lawyers was talking about in the hallway in the law firm. I just didn't understand it. Let me explain. There's a legal standard in court called a child's best interest. A child's best interest puts the child in the middle of the courtroom. And the standard of his or her interest, meaning the child, is so high that it supersedes both parents' constitutional rights, meaning that if a judge is going to make a decision in the child and it's in that child's best interest and your constitutional rights are violated, doesn't matter. It's allowed because that's what's in the best interest of the child. Think about it like this. If a child has an opportunity to be in a single parent home versus a two-parent home, both stable, but the two parents, biological parents, can't get along. If that other parent, step-parent, decides to sign that petition and a judge signs off on it, then that other parent's parental rights have been terminated. That's a nuclear option. So when I applied the amended petition for the adoption of Isaiah in the appellate court process, all hell broke loose. And my lawyer bugged me to get off of that case. And I found out that Isaiah's mother, her lawyer, wanted out of that case pronto. All the research indicated that a 3-judge panel was ironclad. That was the appellate process. And the argument before the 3-judge panel was that the lower court failed to protect the best interests of the child. Simple. Then a strange thing happened. The chief judge of the Court of Appeals intervened and suspended the 3-judge panel, and he assumed personal jurisdiction over the case.
In addition, the chief judge dismissed the attorneys of the case and encouraged both myself and my son's mother to proceed in the court case without counsel and what is called pro se litigation.
And I'm being asked to have my attorney file a motion to withdraw counsel. And this was sent to me March 27th.
The decision to go to the United States Supreme Court was a decision that I had to take.
I was upset that the chief judge intervened in the case and assume personal jurisdiction. I did not want that case under his personal jurisdiction. And then he got rid of the attorneys, and we had to continue without counsel, without an attorney, and go pro se. I did not want to go pro se. I did not want to proceed without an attorney, because I had been writing my legal briefs as a shadow writer, and the lawyer would be filing them. That blew my cover. My wife was already upset that I'd been in the legal books for so long. Now I had to study for the Supreme Court. And the federal courts and the Supreme Court, they don't have a good track record when it comes to protecting, especially African American families. So I knew this was going to be a challenge.
In a span of almost 4 years, my case had went before 5 judges. The first case was a child support hearing before a magistrate judge who could only rule on the issue of child support. The second case went before a Superior Court family judge who issued an order on both the determination of legal custody and the monetary aspects of child support regarding my son's welfare. The third case was heard by a 3-judge appellate court whose job was to determine whether legal errors had been committed by the 2 lower courts. And now I was going before the United States Supreme Court. This court involved 9 judges who would make the final determination in our family matter. The 2 issues before the Supreme Court were: did the Chief Judge violate my constitutional rights when he dismissed our appellate lawyers and overruled a 3-judge appellate court? The second issue was whether the lower court failed to comply with the Supreme Court established law in protecting a child's best interests.
Well, I'm back to doing research. And one thing you learn when you start researching the Supreme Court, it has its own set of rules. Like, I think you can go to law school and just specialize in Supreme Court law. That's just how specialized it is. Give you an example, even the documents, the structure of the document, the font size, I mean, everything is completely different. And on top of that, the court only hears cases that they want to hear. One thing about going to the Supreme Court, though, and reading the rules, there was one particular rule that blew this whole case wide open. So much so, I had to go to the U.S. Department of Justice. And I'll deal with that a little later on in this film.
Looking back on the history of the Supreme Court, people say the 2 most important decisions were probably Brown v. Board of Education and Marbury versus Madison. Are there some decisions that stick in your mind other than those 2 as being of the most monumental consequence? I was wondering what cases you might add to that list of really, really landmark cases.
I mean, people talk about the monumental cases and you assume they're talking about the good ones, Marbury and Brown. I would say the 3rd most significant case in the court's history was Dred Scott, in the sense that, well, Marbury and Brown are good examples of what to do in very challenging situations and how to handle it. Dred Scott's an example where things went terribly wrong.
Dred Scott, is an example of where things went terribly wrong. That's a direct quote from the Chief Judge of the United States Supreme Court. I never heard of Dred Scott being referred to as a family court matter, but indeed, that's what it was. Dred Scott was married in a free state, and the children were conceived within the confines of that marriage as well in a free state. For those of you that don't know, this is the case where Chief Justice Roger B. Taney had that famous quote. The famous quote was that blacks have no rights that the white man is bound to respect. That's considered by legal scholars and historians as the worst decision in the United States Supreme Court. The Dred Scott case was so politically explosive during those times that the National Museum of African American History has a dedicated exhibit of the Dred Scott opinion preserved from 1857. It was Local Rule 29 of the U.S. Supreme Court that actually blew this whole case wide open for me. If you remember, the Chief Judge of the Appeals Court, when he suspended or dismissed the 3-judge panel during the appellate process and assumed personal jurisdiction, I actually filed a challenge, a constitutional challenge, in the Court of Appeals challenging that ruling. Well, the Supreme Court under Rule 29 required me to verify through the Department of Justice that that particular challenge was actually certified on the record. And that was a game changer. After contacting the appellate section of the United States Department of Justice, that section stated that there was no indication on the docket sheet that the lower court ever certified my challenge. I immediately went back to the court and requested all copies of the docketed cases, requesting specifically the docket sheet for the child support case, the family court case, and the Court of Appeals. Once I collected all the docket sheets, I went through each and every one of them very, very carefully. A docket sheet is like an itemized listing of all the events that occurred on the record. If items are missing, then you have a major problem. I went through my complete set of records, and then I noticed I had a major discrepancy. According to the docket, my child support case started September the 7th, 2004. However, I was served with court papers in late February of 2004, and I was in court around March of 2004. Therefore, the idea of a case being filed in September and I'm in court 6 to 7 months prior is impossible. I kept meticulous records of all my court filings. Some of this stuff was over 4 years old and was still in pristine condition. Then my eyes focused on the original court order under the child support. And like a light bulb flashing into my head, everything made sense. It was a counterfeit. It was not a real court order. The address, the names, all of that was phony. Now I understood why my mailings kept coming back as return to sender. I notified the office managers listed on my court documents. The office manager indicated that they never had any office or persons as tenants of that building. I then realized that there was 2 things I needed to do. I had to notify the Supreme Court
and I had to remove the case from a state court and into a federal court. I went back to the U.S. Supreme Court and filed what's called a supplemental brief. Now the record was updated with this new discovery. I then had to go back to the state court, file paperwork notifying the appellate court that the case had been removed and is now in a federal court.
Let me pause for just a quick second, kind of talk about what just happened. I mean, do you understand what just happened? I was catfished. It's very complicated, and I'll try to explain it, but not right now. Young people use the term catfish. Old people use the term you was tricked. It was all a scam. But I think about the fact that I was in therapy and trying to figure out in my head what was going on in the case. I didn't understand what was happening. I mean, first of all, you're embarrassed because you're in family court or child support court. So there's already an assumption that you're irresponsible when it comes to your children. Then I think about the fact that I was working at NASA and I had a 1099 subcontract agreement with Lockheed. Then I had one with SAIC at the Department of Defense. When I look back on it and reflect now, I was progressing. I was on my way. But as soon as those court proceedings started, my mind completely shifted and went into survival mode. So I couldn't focus on business development. I had to focus on employment and paying the bills. Changed the whole trajectory of the direction and the path that I was taking. And then I think about, out of frustration, if I would have made one mistake criminally, how my life would have changed, how my family dynamics would have changed. I had to get out of that courtroom. And of course, I had to go do research. And I had to focus on the U.S. Code, 28, Title 28. Find the removal statute, raise a federal question. And if you remember, the judge in the appeals court created that window of opportunity for me because it raised the federal question and it gave jurisdiction to the federal court. And the case ended up on the desk of U.S. District Judge Peter Massetti here in the District of Maryland. I told you, federal court.
The case would end up on the desk of Judge Peter Massetti.
You said, Mr. Chairman, I'm a United States District Judge in the District of Maryland, a neighbor, frankly, of you, who I think is across the river from us. First of all, as a federal judge, we don't deal with domestic cases very much. That's something I used to do as a state court judge. But under the Hague Convention, we have concurrent jurisdiction with the state court. So
Peter Massetti had a background in family law and was instrumental in assisting David Goldman with his case when his child was taken into Brazil.
I want to close with just one idea that has echoes, I think, some things.
Austin, he is in Rio this morning with the very latest. Jeff, good morning.
The Goldman case involving little Sean became an international matter. His mother, a Brazilian citizen, took Sean to Brazil and refused to come back to the United States. She would later divorce her American husband, Mr. Goldman, and married a Brazilian citizen in Brazil. She unexpectedly died while giving birth to their child. Mr. Goldman sought legal and physical custody after the death of Sean's mother, and the Brazilian court ordered that the child had to be returned to his biological father, Mr. Goldman, to the United States. Judge Massetti was hearing my case at the time he was involved in this matter.
It's a point, although I think Congressman Holt stole my thunder a little bit, but I'm missing with a meeting with the Central Authority of Brazil in less than 2 hours. They're coming to my chambers to talk about the Goldman case and other things. And that was set before this hearing was set, so that you know that we're out there kind of working.
Once the case was moved into federal court, I had to solidify the removal and prove it was not a frivolous maneuver. I did this by filing a motion for summary judgment and put my cards on the table. I added a civil rights statute called a Section 1983, sometimes referred to as under the color of law. What I am saying to the court is that the child support and family court proceedings were based on fraudulent state actors using the instruments and resources of government to create the facade of legitimate proceedings. All of the documents that were sent to my employer and passed around amongst the lawyers were all counterfeit and fake documents. These documents were put on the record before Judge Massetti, and in addition, I added a letter I received from the Attorney General of the state agency that stated they had no record of any Title IV attorney by the name I indicated on those documents, nor was my son's mother ever a client of the Office of the Attorney General Child Support Division. So the question before Judge Massetti was whether or not he would support the petition for the adoption of the minor child. The answer came in the mail, and his decision was to close the case without signing the petition for the adoption of the child and not ruling on the motion for financial compensation and attorney fees. When I filed a motion for reconsideration and requested a hearing before the court, the judge issued a warning and affirmed his decision to close the case. I'm not surprised by Judge Peter Massetti's ruling, if you want to call it that. I mean, he didn't even sign the thing. I don't even know if that thing is even enforceable. I know it didn't mean anything to us at all. It had no teeth in it whatsoever. But I wanted to talk about this whole catfish and welfare fraud, which is what this whole case was about. And I'll try to be brief. There's a lot to cover, but I'll try. First of all, it's a federal program. Child support has nothing to do with family court. Absolutely nothing. The child support program is a part of the Title IV-D federal program run by the Department of Health and Human Services. They run the program and fund the program, but at the state level, they're the ones who actually implement the program. What the federal government requires is that each state provides for each existing collections case a judicial order that authorizes that case. That's so that a person's due process rights aren't violated and any woman anywhere can say John Doe is the daddy and all you need is his social security number and there his whole paycheck is gone. So the federal government doesn't want that to happen, but a lot of times it does happen and the state cheats. lack of a better word of saying it, by failing what's called a data reliability test. Data reliability test is when a regulator comes out and looks at the books of the state agency, child support agency at the state level, and if you have more collection cases than you have judicial orders, and that state fails the data reliability test, it's a huge financial penalty against the state. It comes out of their TANF program, which is the Temporary Assistance of Needy Family. I was fascinated by this whole thing. So fascinated that I, as a software engineer, I actually wrote a software program that would help the federal government find states who were non-compliant. And then I took it upon myself to go and actually set up an appointment with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Yes, I literally sat down with FBI agents and explained to them what was actually going on in this case. And they actually paid very close attention to what I was saying. And they had asked me afterwards, in my opinion, what would be the next steps for them to do. And I said, well, you should go straight on over to Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. And the Office of Inspector General can actually guide you as a federal regulator in the process, because it's run by Health and Human Services, and they also have their law enforcement apparatus as well. As a matter of fact, it is the Office of the Chief Information Officer that plays a major role in the regulatory process. That's the office that makes sure that all documents are compliant under this federal law called the Paperwork Reduction Act. The Paperwork Reduction Act basically protects the general public to ensure that counterfeit documents that look like federal documents aren't in circulation, and that you can always verify whether a document is legit or whether a document is counterfeit through that office. So when I sat down with an OCIO staff, I showed them the documents that were being sent to my employer, no doubt being sent to other employers as well. And the regulator verified exactly what I had been saying all along, that the documents were indeed counterfeit and were non-compliant under the Paperwork Reduction Act. And when she verified that, I asked her to put that in writing with official letterhead from Health and Human Services. And she did. Now is the part where it gets a little deep, because we just proved from the regulator at Health and Human Services that this whole thing, child support, family court, it was all a fraud. It was all a scam. But we got to go a little deeper, because I think there has to be a little more clarity in terms of what's actually going on. And in order to do that, we have to go into the IT world of the federal government. And this is where terms like big data, privacy, and protecting your privacy and cybersecurity, this is where all of this type of terminology actually makes a difference in terms of trying to explain just how big this problem is. Most people can't comprehend how fragile the federal government systems are. I worked for a federal law enforcement agency called the Office of Inspector General. This law enforcement agency has jurisdiction over the federal staff and contractors of their agency. On some occasions, we were briefed by Department of Justice officials and worked on various audits, investigations, and generated reports that were sent to Congress on issues of fraud, waste, and abuse. We also analyzed and audited the technology systems to verify whether or not systems were compliant under FISMA. In this report, the Office of Inspector General over the Health and Human Services Agency has determined that HHS IT security systems were not effective. Because you got to remember, United States Health and Human Services is a federal regulator. So we regulate the whole of the United States. And in order to explain this, I think the best thing to do is to give you an example that we can all identify with, and that is employment. We all work, and inside the federal government, there's a database called a new hire database. The new hire database is a system developed and maintained by Health and Human Services. Whenever you complete a job application as a new hire employee, the employer, by federal law, enters your IRS W-4 information into the new hire database. This system is managed by the IT and cybersecurity team. It is designed to track individuals that may owe back child support to the state. This is a federal system. Therefore, it doesn't matter what state you live in, because the system is able to track your movements from employer to employer. Thus, the Title IV state employee at the Office of Child Support Enforcement is able to locate your information and send wage garnishments to your employer. Unfortunately, the new hire database system has a vulnerability that's easily exploited. That vulnerability is the inability of the system to verify authentic judicial orders. Therefore, anyone with access to the system is able to locate parents and send counterfeit wage garnishments to unsuspecting payroll administrators. In cybersecurity terms, this is what we call a Trojan horse. The payroll administrator is unaware that the document is a counterfeit and will process the garnishment instructions. This type of Trojan horse is dangerous because even if the payroll administrator makes a phone call to the child support office to verify, there is someone there to pick up the phone and legitimize the document. This, of course, is a violation of federal law under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This is where the FBI and other federal law enforcement officials have jurisdiction to investigate and arrest violators of this law. As I reflect on my case, I started researching to see how I can use my experience to help fix a broken system. I looked at the federal laws that regulate health and human services and spent time looking at the Office of the Inspector General website. And the more I researched the OIG, I felt like something just wasn't adding up. You see, the annual budget for Health and Human Services is roughly $2.6 trillion. But if you look at the enforcement and arrest section, you'll see healthcare fraudsters and parents wanted for back child support. Now you gotta understand, fraud, waste, and abuse at this agency, according to the GAO, is roughly $116 billion. So why is the OIG chasing parents for back child support where this is really small money? It just doesn't make sense. I think the best approach is to start with the Civil Rights Office and file a federal administrative claim. We can start looking at civil rights violations under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as address cybersecurity issues under the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. I think we can work in partnership with federal regulators and assist them with fixing a broken system. Also, we need to revisit the tragic case of Dred Scott and his family. A little known fact about his case is that during the trial, the county sheriff outsourced Dred Scott's labor for odd jobs. The sheriff held Dred Scott's wages in escrow, pending the outcome of the case. When the Dred Scott family court case was lost, the funds were transferred to the Sanford family. Dred Scott would die a year and a half later, leaving his wife and 2 daughters in financial poverty. In addition, the chief judge's decision so enraged the community, actually the nation, that he became an outcast, and he died in poverty. It is my belief that no family should be denied their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe the chief judge and the associate judges should revisit this case, not for me, but for all families trapped in a broken welfare system that's slowly ripping them apart. I believe this court should address the federal question that challenges the lower court's inability to make decisions that will protect the sanctity of family. I believe the court should do their part and send a message to the lower federal courts to never deny a family protection when an opportunity presents itself. Now you should understand why Judge Peter Massetti's ruling was so important. If it was an adequate ruling from the judge, it would have at least done 2 things. The first thing, had he signed the petition for the adoption, that would have protected the family from any further litigation. All litigation would have stopped right after that. And then number 2, it would have given federal law enforcement enough strength to go back and investigate and find out who's behind these activities. But by the judge not ruling on any of these issues and simply closing the case, left us in a very vulnerable position. Didn't protect our assets and did not protect us from any further litigation, even though the documents and everything were all fake. As a matter of fact, after he closed the case, a year later, whoever is involved in developing these counterfeit and fake documents wrote up what's called a writ of attachment and levied it against my bank account. Of course, the document was fake, but the bank official didn't know that. I had to do 2 things. I had to go back to the FBI, explain to them what was going on, and then I had to build a record. So I went back to federal court, and this time I had to sue the bank. It's a case called Jamphy versus Wells Fargo Wachovia, because of course Wachovia was acquired by Wells Fargo. That case is also on the Supreme Court. My wife started telling me that I should take a break from reading all of these legal books and legal briefs. And I did. I took a break. And I just focused on developing the iSonar platform, the iSonar software that I started. When President Obama came into office, he signed an executive order, and that really gave me full access to the federal government's data portals. And I just dumped all the data into the iSonar system, and started looking at more cases of what we call fraud, waste, and abuse, and more complex cases. I began to really get into it and started sharing a lot of my findings with other officials. Later, I was invited by Obama's Presidential Council on Science and Technology. Short name is called PCAS.
Warning, I want to apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name when I ask. Our first speaker will be Kwame Gyamfi, who's director of iSonar.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come here and share with you some of the great things we're doing with iSonar. My name is Kwame Gyamfi, and I have worked in the federal government as a contractor for the past 10 years. I started off at NASA as a software engineer. I've worked in the OIG, and currently I work in the Department of Defense.
You know, I'm very humbled by this experience. I learned a lot. I saw things I would not have ever imagined. And in being humbled, I actually spent a lot of time listening to other people's story. I listened to Miss Marsha Maines. At that time, she was a single mother and left with the children. This is a case where this person needed child support.
You know, here I was, this devout wife and mother, and had given up my career to stay at home with my kids, and all of a sudden my ex decides he wants to leave and go through a midlife crisis and start over somewhere else with somebody else. And I was like, no, what about the children? And it's always been about the children for me.
I also met a grandmother, Miss Velna, Grandma Velna. Did you know that grandmothers have no legal rights in the family court on the issue of custody? She will let you know. She talked about that.
But she's emotionally crushed by this.
Right.
It's ruined her.
Right.
And in a sense, it's ruined me.
Right.
And I've become very, very bitter, which I never was before. I've lost a lot of the faith I've had in God. And I hate to say it, but I have, because...
Well, I hate to even ask you about government.
Oh, government! You know, do you know I have a letter from the White House where I've written and got a response, but...
You did get a response.
I got a letter. I saved it. I got a letter. I've written Barack again. My representative, Elijah Cummings, who I loved, I thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Right.
I've lost faith in that. I have tried to go down to his office and sit outside his door. I have requested...
Then I met Attorney Rodriguez, lost his law license, filing RICO actions against the court.
My litigation is a RICO action, racketeering action, based on the conspiracy to damage my business and reputation.
With the fact that you're an attorney.
And they've stigmatized me, and they've taken my away of my license because I litigated to enforce my rights as a father.
I thought that you was still licensed to practice.
No, they took. I am. That's what all this stuff is about. I'm licensed in 10 federal courts, including the Supreme Court. My original license, my state bar license, originally was in Virginia. Is in Virginia.
And when was that taken?
The Virginia State Bar issued an order to take away the license in November of 2006. Yeah, and in order to stop me from working.
Right.
And shut me down.
Right.
Because I was litigating. They knew I was preparing another range of lawsuits against them.
Then I met family rights advocacy groups, court advocates, court watchers, and they are all from different walks of life, different races, different religions, different backgrounds, because we all come from family.
another case where I've gotten that judge to retire, and another judge has recused himself, and all the judges from the 26th Circuit have recused themselves, and now we've got a judge named by the Virginia Supreme Court Chief Justice. But that happened the day after I had a front and back color thing about this thing, and I passed out about 1,000 of them at a Tea Party rally a block away from the Supreme Court.
Overall, this experience has humbled me. It's opened my eyes to real problems that people are actually going through. I do volunteer work now. I volunteer as an advocate for veterans. I'm working on 2 cases involving 2 former military officers. One is a retired captain and orthopedic surgeon. He has a criminal conviction involving $217 for a claim reimbursement that he filed for the wrong day on the application for reimbursement. He got 1 year and a day. This criminal conviction keeps him from practicing surgery. A presidential pardon from Biden would give him the ability to go back to performing complex hip surgeries. Then there's Major D, a retired Air Force officer whose retirement funds has been wiped out based on the type of Trojan horse targeting I've been talking about in this film project. One of my challenges for Major D's case is finding him adequate counsel, because his case is so politically explosive. Based on that specific code that Jeremy had shared with me. So I've decided to launch a podcast show, and one of the first shows I want to deal with is to bring women on the show who are like my wife. These women, they marry men like me, men with children from prior engagements. These women have very little voices in the courtroom, but they parent these children, raise these children, feed these children. They buy clothes, they cook, they clean up after the children, yet they have very little legal rights in the courtroom. Oftentimes, these are the women holding the whole family together, and they get very little recognition. We have to talk about that.
Talk to your mama. Say, man, your mama wanted more money and she told she wanted child support. And she think, I'm going to continue to do for y'all? Nah, that shit dead. Talk to your mama. Don't call me for nothing.
We obviously have to do a segment on fathers. I'd love to do a show on that father on social media, talking to his son about severing the relationship. Because his mother, the boy's mother, put him on child support. It's a complicated case. It sounds like a complicated case. A lot of questions come up. Are these his only children? Are these children born out of wedlock? Is this a marriage that's going through a divorce? Or is this an Abraham case? If it's an Abraham case, then he might be justified in his actions. Abraham case goes back to the book of Genesis in the Bible. When Abraham's wife, Sarah, felt disrespected by Hagar, Sarah told Abraham to send Hagar and the child away. And after Abraham prayed on it, God told him, do what Sarah has asked. This situation men find themselves in goes back centuries. in terms of how they are going to address and deal with the issues of their own household and children that may have been born outside of that marriage. My case was an Abraham case. But my wife, she never said to me to send Isaiah away. And that blessing, my wife, that blessing turned out to be the very legal loophole that would get us out of the hands of the child support system. And for those that don't know the story of how it ended, let me tell you how it went down. They asked me, well, how did things actually end if the federal judge's order, Judge Massetti order, didn't really do anything for you? I tell them the story, true story of Isaiah one day gets in the car and finds a wage garnishment, child support wage garnishment in the seat. And he literally gets on the phone and calls his mother right there in front of me and tells her that you need to shut this thing down. And next thing I know, her and I, we go over to the Office of Child Support Enforcement and they give me back my Social Security number. And that's how it ended. No apology, no refund, no nothing, no compensation. Bogus payments in child support, over $70,000 in attorney fees. This was back in 2014, almost 10 years ago. And turns out the courts were completely useless. I went through child support court, domestic relations family court, state court of appeals, district federal court, and the Supreme Court. All useless. But not just that. Went to the DC Financial Crimes Division at the police department, the FBI, as well as Council Member Phil Mendelson's office. All useless. The only resolution to this madness turned out to be the very child in controversy who had the courage to pick up the phone, call his mother, and tell her to shut this mess down. So, a lot of folks don't know. Isaiah's birth was a difficult one. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck and the doctor struggled to free him. He survived and everyone was crying in the operating room. That in 2004 is when this whole thing started. Isaiah was 6 years old. And for the first 5 years of Isaiah's life, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. And it was during those times that father-son really bonded. So the idea of doing what Abraham did was not even a thought. I knew I had to see Isaiah all the way through. And once he decided to go into the Navy, and I felt like he was on his way to manhood, that I then decided to come back to this film project and tell this story. And I asked for two people's permission to do it. One was Isaiah. The second person was my wife. And once they granted their blessings to finish this project, I finally took it upon myself to complete this. And now it's done. And my prayer is that I hope that this film can inspire change. I hope and pray that this film can protect and save families from total self-destruction, financial destruction. And if I can be a vessel, a help of any kind of support, I welcome that. Thank you for listening and being a part of this experience.
We're doing a video documentary for you. I thought about the idea a while ago, and I thought it would be great if we could develop something for you personally and show you how much
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all the obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. Oh yes, I can make it now, the pain is gone.
Right.
All of the bad feelings have disappeared.
But we're gonna throw these in the trash.
There is a rainbow I've been praying for. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, there's nothing but blue
Hey, boo.
I can see
How you
clearly
doing?
now, the rain is gone. I can see all the obstacles in the way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be so bright, bright, sunshiny day.
Are pretty new.
Right.
Look all around, there's nothing but blue skies. Look straight ahead, there's nothing but blue
In cases like this, you should utilize as many mirrors as you can, okay? Yeah, I know, I have that problem too.
clearly now, the rain is gone. I can see all the obstacles in the way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day.
And drive carefully, son.
It's gonna be.
Gotta read the fine print. Gotta read the fine print.
Gotta read the fine print. Petition denied, stamped on my docket. No wins, no buys. Move and they block it. The court is alive, devouring pockets. Families are fried. We need to coincide. Petition denied, stamped on my docket. No wins, no buys. Move and they block it. The court is alive, devouring pockets. Families are fried. We need to coincide. Existing in a land where the plan was democracy. Freedom is a scam. Cheat a man from equality. Need to overstand how they sham the demography. Feeding off your fam as they ran their monopoly. Bleeding from your glands, need a hand out this tragedy. Scene has you land in a can for eternity. Burning me concerning, we scan the discography. Topography helps you overcome this psychologically. My dude's emasculated by an order of the court. Underestimated was the way she would contort. Numbers escalated when they snatch you like a sport. Got you decimated by the wrath of child support. Denigrate your pride, self-image is tarnished. Emaciate your hide when your wages get garnished. Generate to survive, caught up in the system. Buried alive when they deny your petition. Petition denied, stamped on my docket. No wins, no buys. Move and they block it, the court is alive. Devouring pockets, families are fried. We need to coincide. Petition denied, stamped on my docket. No wins, no buys. Move and they block it, the court is alive. Devouring pockets, families are fried. We need to coincide. It's use of propaganda and stock cameras that nullify all my rights of Miranda. And that's some dander that causes red eye. Only good for nothings, roll over and die.